The east field smelled like wet dirt and burned metal. Dara noticed the smell before she saw the smoke. She had been awake since before the sun came up, not because anyone told her to be, but because something had hit the ground hard enough to shake the water in her bedside cup. Her father had not woken. He slept like a stone these days, ever since her mother passed. So Dara pulled on her boots by herself, took the lantern off the hook by the door, and went out to see what had fallen from the sky. She was 9 years old. She was not afraid of the dark. She had decided this on purpose. The thing that had come down was not a meteorite. Dara had seen pictures of meteorites in her school reader. They were lumps of rock, dull and scorched, and they made simple round holes in the ground. What sat in the middle of her family's east field was made of metal, dark metal, shaped in curves that did not look like anything built on Bryn's Landing. It had split open on impact. One side had cracked like an egg. Dara stopped at the edge of the field and held the lantern up. There was something inside the broken pod. It was small. It was scaled. It had wings folded tight against its body, and its tail was curled around itself so tightly it looked like a knot. Its eyes were closed. It was making a sound, a low, thin, trembling sound, the kind of sound that did not need translation. Dara had heard that sound before. She had made it herself, in the dark, under her blanket, after her mother's funeral. She knew what that sound was. She did not run back to the house. She did not shout. She crouched down at the edge of the cracked pod and set the lantern in the mud beside her, and she looked at the creature for a long time without moving. It was breathing. That was the first thing she checked. Its sides rose and fell in a quick, shallow rhythm. Too fast, like it was scared even in whatever half-sleep it had fallen into. Its scales were dark gray-green, the color of the river in winter, and one of its wings had a small tear in the thin membrane near the joint. It was not a big tear, but it was there. Dara reached into her coat pocket. She always kept the rabbit in her coat pocket. Her mother had made it from scraps of cloth left over from a quilt project, stuffed it with cotton wool, and sewn 2 lopsided button eyes on its face. It was not a beautiful toy. The ears were different lengths. One button eye was slightly higher than the other. Her mother had laughed about it, and Dara had loved it so much she had carried it every single day for 2 years without stopping. She carried it because it still smelled faintly like her mother's workroom. She carried it because holding it was the closest thing she had left. She looked at it in her hand. Then she looked at the creature in the broken pod. She leaned forward and placed the rabbit on the ground, halfway between her and the pod. Then she sat back. She rested her elbows on her knees and waited. 3 minutes passed, maybe more. The creature's trembling sound continued. Then one eye opened. It was gold, a deep, bright, extraordinary gold, like the center of a sunflower but lit from inside. The eye moved slowly, scanning the dark field, until it found the lantern. It stayed on the lantern for a moment. Then it found the rabbit. The sound stopped. The creature's nose, long, narrow, faintly ridged, extended forward. It was sniffing. Dara stayed completely still. She had learned from her father that wild things ran when you moved too fast, and she did not want this creature to run. She did not know why she felt so strongly about that. She just did. The creature looked at the rabbit for a long time. Then it looked at Dara. Dara said, quietly, "You can have it. It's all right." She did not know if it understood her. She did not know what it was. She said it anyway. The creature pulled itself forward on 2 front limbs, slowly, dragging its tail, favoring its uninjured wing. It reached the rabbit. It sniffed it again. Then, very carefully, it touched the rabbit with one claw, one single claw, extended like a finger, pressing gently against the cotton wool side. Something happened that Dara did not have a word for. She felt it in her chest. A warmth, sudden and deep, like stepping from cold air into a room with a fire in it. Her eyes stung for a second. She blinked. The creature made a new sound. Low, round, not trembling anymore. It pulled the rabbit under one wing. It curled around it. Its gold eyes stayed on Dara. Dara sat in the mud of the east field and looked back at it. She was not warm enough, and her boots were getting soaked, and she had school in a few hours. None of that seemed very important right now. "My name is Dara," she said. "I live here. You can stay as long as you need." She stayed there until the sun came up. When her father found her, she was sitting cross-legged in the wet field, and there was a scaled, winged creature the size of a large dog asleep in her lap, with its claws still wrapped around a stuffed rabbit. Ren stood at the edge of the field with his coffee in his hand and looked at his daughter and the thing sleeping on her, and he did not say a word for a long time. Then he said, "Is it hurt?" Dara said, "Its wing. A small tear." Ren set down his coffee. He went back to the house and came back with his coat, which he draped over Dara and the creature both. He sat down in the dirt beside his daughter. He did not ask her to go inside. He did not tell her to be careful. He just sat there with her and watched the creature sleep and waited for the day to figure itself out. That was the morning everything started. Dara did not know it yet. Her father did not know it yet. The colony of 3,000 people on Bryn's Landing did not know it. And the Drakvori Empire, 4,000 years old, spanning 800 star systems, powerful enough to crack moons, did not know it either. They would all find out. That afternoon, the colony's communications officer sent a standard notification beacon to the nearest galactic relay. The message said, "Unidentified vessel wreckage, apparent life form recovered, condition stable, requesting guidance." Simple words. Honest words. 11 hours later, 3 warships changed course. 6 days after the crash, the sky above Bryn's Landing went dark in the wrong way. It was midday. The sun was out. But 3 shapes came down from the upper atmosphere in close formation, and when they caught the light, the whole colony could see they were not clouds and not ships from any neighboring world. They were warships. Each one was 3 times the length of the longest building on Bryn's Landing, shaped like the heads of enormous angular animals, with weapon ports running along their lower hulls like teeth. The colony administrator, a calm older man named Fel, sent a greeting signal immediately. He had been doing this job for 19 years and had never encountered anything that a comm signal could not at least slow down. The reply came in standard galactic trade language, translated by the colony's relay computer in a flat, emotionless voice. "This is Commander Reth of the 4th Talon Imperial Retrieval Division. You are in possession of a Drakvori royal hatchling. You will surrender the hatchling within the hour. Any damage to the hatchling will be considered an act of aggression against the Empire. Confirm receipt." Fel typed back. Message received. "The hatchling is healthy and safe. We are happy to cooperate with the handoff. Please advise on care procedures we should follow in the meantime." There was a pause of about 40 seconds. Then, "No further procedures required. Prepare for ground team arrival." Fel thought this was reasonable. He wanted to tell Ren. Ren was in his barn, building an extension. In 6 days, the creature Dara had named Vor had grown from the size of a large dog to the size of a small pony. It had happened fast enough that Ren had needed to widen the shelter doorway twice. He was widening it a 3rd time when Fel arrived and explained that an alien military retrieval team was coming to collect the baby dragon. Ren set down his tools. He looked at Vor, who was sitting in the corner of the barn with Dara, watching her draw pictures of him in the dust with a stick. Vor made the low, round sound he always made when Dara was close. He had the rabbit tucked under his left wing. "All right," Ren said. "I suppose we knew someone would come." Dara looked up. She did not say anything. She looked at Vor, and Vor looked back at her with gold eyes, and Ren thought, watching them, that something in the air between his daughter and this creature was thicker than it should be. He could not explain that thought. He filed it away. The ground team arrived in a small landing vessel that set down in the cleared area behind the grain storage building. Commander Reth came out first. He was tall. All Drakvori were tall, 8 feet at least, covered in dark scales, armor fitted precisely over their natural plating. He had marks on his shoulders that the colony translator said indicated high rank. Behind him came 4 soldiers and a specialist wearing different insignia. Reth looked at the colony around him. Small buildings. Brown fields. A few dozen humans standing at a respectful distance. He had been told this was a minor human settlement. It looked exactly like a minor human settlement. Nothing about it surprised him. Fel greeted him. They exchanged the standard formal acknowledgments. Reth was polite but direct. He wanted to see the hatchling immediately. They walked to Ren's property. Reth's specialist, whose title translated roughly as Psychic Assessment Officer, walked slightly behind the group, watching everything with very still eyes. They came into the barn. Vor was standing in the middle of the space. He had grown enough that his head was level with Dara's shoulder when he stood straight. He looked at the Drakvori retrieval team with his gold eyes. Reth stopped. Something about this was different from his briefing. The hatchling did not look traumatized. It did not look feral. Its wing membrane had been wrapped in a clean bandage. It was well fed. It was standing with its tail relaxed and its wings slightly open, the way young Drakvori did when they felt comfortable and unthreatened. And it was standing with its body angled slightly in front of the small human girl beside it. Reth stepped forward. "We are here to collect the hatchling," he said through the translator. "You may step aside." Dara looked up at him. She was small. Her boots were muddy. She had the look of a child who had not slept very well, but was not going to admit it. "His name is Vor," she said. "He had a bad few days. He's okay now, but he doesn't like loud noises." Reth looked at her. He said, "Step aside." He moved forward again, reached toward the hatchling. What happened next happened fast. Vor made a sound none of them had heard before. Not the low, warm rumble of comfort. Not the thin, trembling sound of fear, but something sharp and layered and very loud that hit the air like a physical force. Every human in the barn flinched backward. The soldiers brought up their hands. The translator device fell off Fell's belt, and a barrier appeared around Vor and Dara. Not visible exactly, but present. A pressure in the air, the kind of thing that made the small hairs on the back of every human neck stand straight up. Nobody moved through that barrier. Nobody could. Reth turned slowly to his specialist. He said one word in Drakvori. The specialist's expression was the expression of someone whose entire professional understanding of the universe had just been firmly stepped on. She stared at the hatchling and the girl for a very long time. Then she turned to Reth and said, very quietly, in a voice the translator did not catch, but that Reth understood perfectly, something that made him go very still. He stared at the hatchling. He stared at the girl. The girl stared back at him. She was not aggressive. She was not frightened. She looked like she was waiting to see what he would do next, the way you wait for a neighbor to decide whether they want tea or coffee. She said, "Would you like to come inside? My dad made bread this morning." Reth had commanded warships. He had negotiated with sovereign civilizations. He had survived 3 armed conflicts and 1 diplomatic incident that had nearly restarted a war. He had never, in 32 years of imperial service, been offered bread by a small, muddy human child while standing inside a psychic barrier generated by a royal hatchling who should not have been able to generate a psychic barrier for another 7 years. He stood in the barn on Bryn's Landing and looked at his specialist and said, "Tell me what you told me again." She said, "The Rexol bonded. It is complete. The air has imprinted on the human girl." Outside, the 3 warships hung in orbit, waiting for orders. Inside the barn, a 9-year-old girl sat back down in the hay beside a dragon hatchling, who lowered his great head onto her knee, who still had the stuffed rabbit under his wing, and made the low, round, warm sound that meant everything was fine. It was not fine. Nothing about this situation was fine. The Empire did not have a word yet for what this was. It did not have a rule. It did not have a procedure. Reth walked slowly out of the barn. He needed to send a message to High Command. He thought he would need several drafts to explain this correctly. He needed 11. The first thing the Empire argued about was whether Dara was a problem or a solution. This argument happened very far away, in a room on an Imperial core world that Dara had never heard of, between people she would never meet. Reth's report had reached High Command in less than a day. By the time he woke up the following morning in the guest room Fel had offered him, a small, clean room that smelled like dried grain, which he found unexpectedly pleasant. The argument had already been going for hours. Reth knew this because the messages were waiting for him. 14 of them. He read them in order and felt a very familiar feeling, which was the feeling of people who outranked him making confident decisions about a situation they had not personally seen. He sent back one message. It said, "I recommend you send Dr. Oris before any final decision is made. I cannot adequately describe what I am looking at in text format." Dr. Oris was the most senior xenopsychic researcher in the Empire's academic division. She was 70 years old, had studied 32 species, and had an opinion about everything and the credentials to say it loudly. She arrived on Bryn's Landing 3 days later on a fast transport, accompanied by 2 research assistants and a camera unit. She asked to see the hatchling immediately. Reth took her to the barn. She stood in the doorway and watched Vor and Dara for 10 minutes without saying a word. Dara was teaching Vor to catch a thrown stick, not because Vor could not catch things, but because Dara seemed to think it was important that he try new things every day. Ver was very bad at catching the stick. He kept missing it by an arm's length and looking confused. Dara laughed every time, which made him try again immediately. Dr. Oris watched this. Her two assistants wrote things down. Reth stood beside her and said nothing. Eventually, Dr. Oris said, "The barrier reflex was oriented toward the girl?" "Yes," Reth said. "Not toward the hatchling's own body. Toward her." "Yes." "And the Rexol confirmation was definitive?" "My specialist has done this assessment 40 times. She said she has never seen a reading that clear." Dr. Oris made a sound in her throat. She asked to see the object. "The rabbit." Dara was agreeable. She collected the rabbit from Vor's wing. Vor made a low displeased rumble at this, but allowed it, and brought it to Dr. Oris, who held it in both hands and closed her eyes. A Drakvori psychic reader could receive impressions from objects the same way they could receive impressions from living beings. The ability was strongest with objects that had been held or used by someone over a long period of time. Weapons sometimes carried the emotions of battles. Gifts sometimes carried the emotions of the giving. Dr. Oris held the rabbit for 2 full minutes. Her assistants stopped writing. When she opened her eyes, her expression was very careful. It was the expression of someone who had found something they did not expect and were not yet sure how to hold. She handed the rabbit back to Dara. She said, in very precise galactic trade language, "Who made this?" Dara said, "My mother did. Before she died." Dr. Oris said, "How long did you carry it?" 2 years, Dara said. "I carry it everywhere." Dr. Oris nodded slowly. She looked at Reth. She said, "I need to send a report before High Command makes any final decisions." Reth said, "I thought you might." The report took her a full day to write. Reth received a copy. He read it twice. He sent it directly to High Command with a note that said, "Please read all of it before responding." The report said, in careful academic language, the following things. The stuffed rabbit had triggered the Rexol bonding event. Not Dara herself, at least not initially. The object had been held by a grieving human child for 2 years with a consistency and emotional intensity that was extraordinary by any measurable standard. Dr. Oris had read objects belonging to soldiers, to devoted parents, to beings who had loved someone for decades. She had never encountered an object that dense with emotion from a single person. The child did not saturate this object intentionally, the report stated. Humans do not have psychic ability. They cannot project or transmit emotion in any documented sense. And yet this object contains the equivalent of a sustained psychic impression that would take a trained Drakvori empath years to generate deliberately. I have no framework for how this is possible. I can only report what the readings showed. Grief, love, memory, and something I can only call quiet stubbornness, an absolute refusal to let go of the source of these feelings. The hatchling, in full psychic crisis and seeking any anchor available, encountered this object in the dark, in an unknown place, alone. It registered the emotional content. It latched. The report went on. But the bond did not form to the object. It formed to the source. The hatchling followed the emotional signature back to its origin and found a living person. A child. The Rex soul, once formed, is complete and permanent. There is no reversal procedure. There is no alternative bonded partner. This is not a malformed bond or an error. By every metric I can apply, this is a fully realized Rex soul, the strongest category of bond reading I have encountered in 40 years of practice. Dr. Oris's conclusion was 3 sentences. I do not know what to call what humans do with their feelings. I do not know why they do it to inanimate objects. I know that it saved this hatchling's life, and that it has now bound the heir of the 4th Talon to a human child on a farming colony, and that the Empire will need to make a decision very carefully, because whatever the humans are doing, it is not nothing. High Command read the full report. Then they had the argument again, for 2 more days, with better information and louder disagreement. On Bryn's landing, none of this reached Dara. She was focused on other things. Vor's wing bandage needed changing every morning. He had started eating twice as much as the first week. She had begun keeping a notebook where she wrote down what he liked and what he didn't. He liked warm things, high places, and having his head scratched behind the ear ridges. He did not like the colony's automated grain sorting machine, which made a clicking sound he found deeply offensive. Reth found himself walking to the barn one evening without a clear reason for doing so. He stood outside and listened to Dara talk to Vor about her day at the settlement school, explaining what a math lesson was, while Vor pressed his nose against her arm and made the round warm sound. The smell of hay and the cool evening air made the place feel very quiet. He went back inside before she saw him. He had a report to write. On the fourth day, High Command reached a decision. They called it Option 3, and they filed it with every degree of reluctance that 4,000 years of imperial pride could produce. Dara was to be granted formal imperial ward status, extended to her and her family, under the protection of the 4th Talon bloodline. The Rexol bond would be recognized legally. The colony of Bryn's Landing would be placed under imperial protected status, pending a long-term arrangement. Reth was ordered to remain on site, indefinitely, as mission overseer. Fel read the official notification carefully, twice, and then asked Reth if he would like to come for dinner to celebrate. Reth said this was not something that required celebrating. He came to dinner anyway. Ren made something called a stew. Dara asked Reth if he liked it. He said it was adequate. Dara seemed to take this as high praise and looked satisfied. That night, in the barn, Ver curled around his rabbit and slept. On the other side of the galaxy, scholars updated 4 different legal documents. A new category of protected status was opened for the first time in Imperial history, and a 9-year-old girl's name was written into it. She did not know. She was already asleep. Nobody told Commander Reth that staying on Bryn's Landing for a year would change him. He would not have believed it if they had. He set up a working post in the colony's small communications building, where Fel gave him a desk and a chair that was slightly too small for him, and he filed his reports to High Command on a regular schedule and kept careful records and remained, at all times, a commander on assignment. This was the framework he kept around himself. It helped. The first month was professional. He observed the colony. He made notes. He monitored Vor's development and filed growth measurements. He confirmed that the Rexol bond remained stable. He wrote things like, Day 8. Hatchling continues to demonstrate healthy weight gain and wing membrane recovery. Bond partner shows no signs of psychic degradation from proximity to the bond. Colony personnel maintain non-threatening behavioral patterns. No concerns. He did not write. Day 8. The colony's elderly medical officer, a woman named Hess, spent 2 hours explaining to me how she had improvised Vor's dietary supplements based on an archived xenobiology text and trial and error. She was correct on every point. When I told her this, she said, well, a body is a body. I did not know how to respond to this. He did not write. Day 12. The child asked me to watch Vor attempt to catch a stick. I watched for 20 minutes. I am not sure why I stayed that long. The second month was harder to keep professional. Ren, Dara's father, was a quiet man who worked constantly and asked for very little from anyone. He never tried to talk to Reth about politics or the Empire or what was going to happen. He would simply appear near wherever Reth was working with a task in hand, repairing a fence, hauling grain sacks, adjusting the water lines, and work nearby in silence, and occasionally say something simple and direct, and then go back to work. Reth found this deeply confusing at first. He was used to people either asking things of him or staying out of his way. Ren did neither. He was just there. One afternoon, Ren said, while fixing a generator, my daughter trusts you. Reth said, she should not trust me. She does not know me. Ren said, she knows what she needs to know. Reth thought about this for several days. The third month was when the settlement children began to visit the barn in organized groups. Dara had announced to her school that Vor needed social contact with a variety of people so he would not become too attached to only one person. This was, as far as Reth could determine, completely her own idea, not based on any scientific guidance. It was, as far as Dr. Orris confirmed when he asked her, also completely correct. Hatchlings who bonded too exclusively to a single individual showed social development problems later. The colony's 9-year-old had arrived at accurate xenobiology through intuition. He wrote in his official report, hatchling social development showing excellent markers. Bond partner demonstrating strong adaptive instincts. He did not add, I am beginning to suspect the child understands this creature better than my own specialists do. The fourth month was when Vor became large enough that the barn was no longer sufficient and Ren, with help from the whole colony, built a proper shelter. Half open to the sky, so Vor could come and go, reinforced on the sides because Vor's tail had become a structural hazard when he turned too quickly. 3 of the colony's builders worked on it for 2 weeks. Nobody was asked to help. They simply did. Reth watched this happen. He filed a report that said, "Colony demonstrates strong cooperative behavioral patterns." He had no framework for what it actually was, which was 30 people spending their free time building a house for someone else's dragon because a child they all loved needed it. The 5th month was when a news relay picked up the story and everything got louder. 6 alien embassies sent inquiries. 2 academic institutions requested access to the site. A Drakvori cultural scholar sent a 40-page document arguing that the Rex-Soul Bond event was a sign of divine favor and that Bryn's landing should be treated as sacred ground. 3 journalists sent requests. Reth denied all of them. He wrote a single statement for the Galactic Press. "The hatchling is healthy. No further statement will be issued." He then turned off the external communications channel for non-official use and felt considerably better. That evening, he was sitting on the steps of the communications building when Dara came and sat down beside him. She did this sometimes. She did not always talk. Sometimes she just sat. This time she said, "There are a lot of people who want to come here now, aren't there?" Reth said, "Yes." She said, "Because of Vor?" "Because of the bond," he said. "It is unusual." She thought about this. Then she said, "Is he going to be okay when he's older and goes back with you?" Reth was quiet for a moment. This was the question he had been not asking himself for several months. He said, "The bond goes where you go. If you are well, he is well." She said, "So I have to be well." "Yes." She nodded. "Okay," she said, as if that settled it. Then she went back inside. Reth sat on the steps for a while longer. He looked at the sky. The stars over Bryn's landing were very clear on cold nights. He thought about his bonded partner and his adult offspring in the Imperial Core, whom he had not seen in over a year. His partner had sent a message last week. He had written back that same day. This was unusual for him. On previous assignments, he sometimes let weeks pass between messages. The 6th month was when Dara got sick. It was a human illness, common in cold seasons, nothing life-threatening, but it kept her in bed for 4 days with a fever. On the 1st day, Vor stood outside her bedroom window and would not move. On the 2nd day, he pushed the window open and put his head inside and refused to pull it back out. On the 3rd day, Hess simply opened the window all the way and let him put his whole neck inside, because the fever dropped 2 degrees when he did, and she was a practical woman who favored results over protocol. Reth spent those 4 days walking past Ren's house every few hours. He told himself he was monitoring the bond stability. On the 4th day, when Dara came outside wrapped in a blanket to sit in the thin winter sun, Vor made a sound none of them had heard before, high and fast and bright, almost musical. Every person within earshot stopped what they were doing. Reth wrote in his report that night, Day 201, hatchling vocal development producing new tonal range. Bond partner recovered from minor illness. Bond stability, optimal. He sat with the report open for a while. Then he added one more line, which he had never added to an official report before, which said, Colony is well. The year did not end the way most of his years ended, with a departure and a new assignment and the clean feeling of a completed mission. The year ended with Dara's 10th birthday, which the entire colony celebrated with food and music and a bonfire, and Vor sitting at the edge of the firelight with his tail curled around 3 children who had fallen asleep against his side, the rabbit tucked under his wing, watching Dara dance with her father. Reth stood at the edge of the gathering with a jar of something fermented that Ren had given him and watched a 10-year-old girl spin in the firelight, while a creature that would one day be an imperial heir kept 3 sleeping children warm. He wrote nothing in his report that night. Some things did not fit in reports. The first time Dara saw the stars up close, she pressed both hands against the viewport glass and did not speak for a long time. Then she said, They look different from out here. Reth, who was standing behind her because she had asked him to come look too, said, Different how? She said, More like lights someone left on. He thought about this. He had traveled through deep space more times than he could count. He had never thought about the stars that way. He was not sure he could stop thinking about it now. The Imperial flagship was large enough that Dara's entire settlement could have fit inside it with room left over. She treated it the way she treated everything unfamiliar, which was to walk up to it directly and start asking questions. She asked the ship's navigation officer how the star maps worked. She asked the crew chief what all the symbols on the hull meant. She asked Reth's second officer, a very serious young soldier named Dar, whether he ever got lonely on long journeys. Dar said that soldiers did not discuss personal matters. Dara said, "That sounds hard." Dar looked confused for the rest of the day. Ren walked through the ship quietly, taking things in without saying much. Hess, the colony medic, had brought a journal and was filling it steadily. She had been invited because she was the closest thing Bryn's Landing had to a xenobiologist, and because, in Reth's private estimation, she was the most sensible person on the planet, and having her present would help. Vor traveled in an open cargo bay that had been cleared and fitted for him. He was enormous now. His wingspan required careful folding just to fit through the corridor doors. His scales had deepened from gray-green to something closer to dark jade, and the ridge along his back had developed a faint luminescence that appeared when he was content. He was content most of the time when Dara was nearby. The rabbit lived in a small net pocket that Dara's father had sewn onto Vor's harness, right at wing joint level, where Vor could reach it easily. Drakvori crew members who passed through the cargo bay did so carefully and with respect. A royal heir was not something you walked past carelessly. But Dara noticed that several of them stopped longer than they needed to, watching Vor with an expression she recognized. She saw it on people back home when they came to the barn for the first time. It was the expression of someone who expected to be frightened and was instead surprised by something else. She always waved at them when they looked. Most of them did not wave back. Some of them did. The journey took 3 days. On the second day, Reth sat down across from Dara at one of the ship's small tables and told her what to expect when they arrived on Draxol. He used simple language. He explained the formal greeting procedures, the correct way to stand, the things that were considered respectful and the things that were not. He was thorough. He had prepared notes. Dara listened to everything. Then she said, "What is the matriarch like?" Reth said, "She is the most powerful individual in the 4th Talon bloodline. She has led a war fleet and signed 14 sovereign treaties. She is very old and very strong." Dara said, "Is she kind?" Reth paused. He had never thought about the matriarch in those terms. He said, carefully, "She is fair." Dara seemed to take this as encouraging. She nodded and went back to her drawing, which was a picture of Vor asleep with the rabbit, done in the pencil she carried everywhere. Reth looked at the drawing for a moment before he went back to his work. Draxol from orbit was extraordinary. It was a dark world, deep violet atmosphere, oceans that were almost black, mountain ranges that caught the light like armor. The imperial palace of the 4th Talon spanned the largest of these ranges, built into the stone over 4,000 years, layer over layer, so that it was not so much a building as a feature of the landscape. From orbit, it looked like the mountain had grown a crown. Dara said, "From the viewport, it's beautiful." Reth said, "It is old." She said, "Same thing, sometimes." The landing was formal. The courtyard was assembled. Lines of Imperial guards stood in 2 columns extending from the landing pad to the entrance of the inner court, their armor polished, their posture exact. Beyond them, in a loose arc facing the landing, stood the ruling family of the 4th Talon and their senior court. Reth came down the ramp first, then Ren and Hess, then Dara. Vor came last, ducking through the expanded cargo bay door, and when he stepped into the open air of Draxol for the first time and spread his wings slightly to feel the atmosphere, every Drakvori in the courtyard went still. They had read the reports. They had seen the footage from Bryn's Landing. But seeing their royal heir in person, healthy, large, shining, made the entire assembled court hold its breath for a moment. Then Vor folded his wings and moved to stand beside Dara, and the breath came back. The matriarch stepped forward from the arc of the court. She was ancient by any measure. Her scales were the deep gray of old stone, marked with the scarring of decades and the ceremonial inlays that indicated her rank. She was tall even among Drakvori. She moved the way very old, powerful things moved, without any wasted effort. She stopped in front of Dara. She looked at this small human child in a borrowed formal robe, with a bad braid and muddy boots she had not been able to entirely clean, standing at the foot of the imperial court. She extended one enormous scaled hand, palm forward, the formal Drakvori greeting of highest regard, offered to equals, to honored allies, to those worthy of being remembered. Dara looked at the hand. She looked up at the matriarch's face. And then she stepped forward and put both arms around the matriarch's middle and held on. The courtyard went absolutely silent. A Drakvori had not been embraced in any recorded diplomatic or formal proceeding in the entire 4,000-year history of the Empire. The matriarch's psychic specialists, standing at the rear of the court, registered what they were trained to look for: threat, manipulation, fear. They found none of these things. What they found instead they would discuss for weeks afterward, because they had no precise category for it. It read most closely to what their texts described as complete and uncalculated warmth, like standing next to a fire that had no idea it was warm. Ver made the low, round, musical sound. The matriarch, very slowly, lowered her other hand and rested it gently on Dara's back. She held that position for several seconds. The court watched. Reth watched. Ren, standing to one side, had his jaw set in the way he always held it when he was trying not to show that something had affected him. The matriarch said, in the ancient formal tongue, in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard, "The air chose well." Then she straightened. She looked at Dara, who had stepped back and was looking up at her with the direct expression she used for everything. The matriarch said, in trade language now, "I have wanted to meet you." Dara said, "I've wanted to meet you too." Ver talks about, I think he does. He gets a certain look when I think he's thinking about home. The matriarch looked at Vor. Ver looked back at his blood kin with calm gold eyes. He was not anxious. He was not torn. He was standing on his home world next to the person he had chosen, and he was steady. The matriarch said, "Come inside. There is much to discuss." Later, in a private room with carved stone walls and firelight, the matriarch held the rabbit in both hands, eyes closed, the same way Dr. Oris had. She held it longer than Dr. Oris had. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Dara for a long time. She said, "In 4,000 years, no Rex Solon, no first gift, has ever been given before the bond was known. Every record we have shows the gift coming after, given in ceremony, given in recognition, given with intention. You gave this before you knew what Vor was, before you knew what it would mean, before anyone told you to." Dara said, "He was scared. I had something that helped me when I was scared, so I gave it to him." "It cost you something," the matriarch said. Dara said, "Yeah, but he needed it more than I did." The matriarch was quiet. Outside the room, the court was waiting. Beyond them, across the Empire, 800 star systems connected by light-speed relay were about to receive a broadcast about a colony world and a hatchling and a small human child. But in this room, first, the matriarch told Dara that a new word was being added to the Drakvori language, that the scholars had spent months on it, that it would appear in imperial law from this day forward, and what it meant, and why it was named the way it was. The word was Darsol. It meant warmth given anyway, at a cost, to a stranger who was frightened. It meant love that does not wait to know if it is deserved. It meant a poorly sewn rabbit with mismatched button eyes, placed in the mud in the dark, between a child and something unknown. Dara looked at the rabbit in the matriarch's hands. She thought about her mother's workroom. She thought about the morning in the east field, the wet cold, the lantern, the sound Vor had been making. She said, "Can I have it back now?" The matriarch smiled. It looked unusual on a face built for very serious expressions. She held the rabbit out. Dara took it. She walked to Vor, who was curled in the corner of the room, and tucked the rabbit into his harness pocket where it belonged. Vor's luminescent ridge brightened. The matriarch watched this. Then she stood. She had a court waiting. She had a broadcast to authorize. She had 4,000 years of imperial tradition to move, slightly but permanently, in a new direction. She was ready. The thing about the great court of the Fourth Talon was that it had seen everything. It had seen wars end and begin. It had watched 3 bloodline successions, 2 economic collapses of neighboring empires, and 14 treaties signed over 4,000 years of recorded history. The court's oldest members had held their positions for longer than some species had been discovered. They had learned to hold their faces still for everything. They held their faces still when Dara walked in. The great court was a vast hall of carved dark stone, lit by burning channels of some fuel that ran in channels along the walls and gave the room a warm, low, orange light. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadow. Along both sides of the central walkway stood the full assembly: generals, high scholars, diplomatic staff, bloodline nobles, psychic specialists, and cultural custodians. Every significant position in the fourth Talon hierarchy was present. Reth stood to the right of the walkway, at the edge of the assembly, in his dress uniform. He had been awake since before dawn, running final checks on logistics. He had already checked 3 times. He told himself this was professional thoroughness. He did not look at Dara's father across the hall, who was doing the same thing, standing very still with his hands clasped behind his back and his jaw tight. The matriarch entered from the far end and took her position at the head of the court. The assembly came to complete stillness. The broadcast signal opened. Somewhere across 800 star systems, the relay network carried this moment to every Imperial world and listening post and to 17 alien embassies that had filed formal observer requests. Then Dara walked in. She was wearing the formal robe again. Someone had made her a proper one this time, fitted correctly, in the dark colors of an Imperial ward. Her hair was braided by Hess, which was much better. She held nothing in her hands. She walked at an even pace down the center of the hall, looking neither left nor right, the way Reth had practiced with her twice the previous evening. She had listened carefully and done exactly as he demonstrated. She also, when she passed the 7th pillar on the right, glanced over at Reth and gave him a very small nod. He gave her one back. Vor entered after her. The ceiling was high enough for him, barely. He walked on all 4 limbs with his wings folded, his tail carried low, the luminescent ridge along his back glowing with a steady warmth. He was very large. The sound of his footsteps was the sound of something that mattered arriving. He came to stand beside Dara, and when he settled, the whole room settled with him. The matriarch waited until the hall was completely silent. Then she spoke in the ancient formal tongue, slowly enough that the translators could follow. She spoke about the Rexol. She spoke about what the bond meant to the Drakvori, that it was not merely biological, not merely tradition, but the cornerstone of how they understood trust and loyalty and the beginning of life. She spoke about the 4,000 years during which no Rexol had ever formed outside the bloodline. And then she spoke about a night on a small cold planet at the edge of recognized space. About a broken pod and a frightened hatchling and a child who had sat down in the mud with a lantern and a stuffed rabbit and chosen, for no strategic reason and with no expectation of anything in return, to stay. She said, "We have spent this past year trying to categorize what the human child did. Our scholars have files on it. Our psychics have read it. Our legal division has written 12 documents about it. And what every one of them comes back to, in the end, is this." She gave the most important thing she had to something that was afraid. She gave it before she knew what it was. She gave it before she knew she was giving anything at all. The matriarch paused. "We have added a word to our language for this. The scholars will record it. The legal division has already written it into Imperial ward law. But a word is not enough." She looked at Dara. A word is not enough for a person. Among the Drakvori, the lowering of the head in formal assembly was not submission and not defeat. It was reserved for moments that the Empire wished to permanently mark, not in documents, but in the memory of everyone present. A matriarch might do it once in a reign, perhaps twice, for something truly without precedent. The matriarch lowered her head, and then the court followed. Not all at once. It began at the front, where the senior bloodline nobles stood, and moved back through the assembly like a tide going out. Generals who had commanded fleets. Scholars who had spent decades being certain about things. Young officers who were still learning what certainty cost. All of them, one by one and then together, lowering their heads toward a 10-year-old girl in a formal robe with a braid that was slightly crooked. Reth lowered his head with them. He had known it was coming. He had been briefed on the ceremony. He had thought, when he was briefed, that he would feel it as a procedural event. He had been wrong about that. He stood in the hall with his head lowered and felt something very old and very wordless, which was the feeling of being present at something that would still be remembered when everyone in this room was gone. Dara looked at the assembled court. Reth could not see her face. He heard her take a slow breath. Then she bowed back. It was not the formal Drakvori bow. It was a simple human bow, forward at the waist, hands at her sides, held for a moment, then upright again. The bow of one person to other people they respected. Vor's ridge blazed. The low, round, musical sound came up out of him like a tide, filling the entire hall, bouncing off the carved stone ceiling, warm and deep and steady. Several members of the court who had never heard that sound before found themselves searching for a word for it later, and mostly arrived at the same one: belonging. The broadcast carried it all. Every world on the relay network received the image of the great court of the fourth talon lowered toward a human girl, and the sound of a royal air singing in a way that needed no translation. Reth filed his final mission report that night from his quarters in the palace. He had been drafting it in his head for 3 months. He had thought it would be straightforward by the time he reached the end. It was not straightforward. He sat with it for a long time. He wrote, the air was healthy. The bond was stable. All parties had reached formal agreement. He listed the legal outcomes, the protected status granted, the new classifications filed. He wrote the things reports were for. Then he sat back and looked at the ceiling for a while. He wrote one more section, which he labeled as personal observation, which was a category that did not officially exist in Imperial mission reporting. He wrote it anyway. He wrote, I was sent to retrieve a hatchling. I spent a year with the people who found it. They are called softwalkers by the Empire, a name given because they are small and fragile and leave no marks on the galaxy that we can easily see. I used that name myself when this assignment began. I do not use it anymore. Not because they are hard or strong in the ways we measure. They are not. They have no fleet, no psychic ability, no significant territorial reach. By every measure we use, they are the smallest civilization in this sector of space. But I watched them do things this year that I do not have categories for. I watched them build a shelter for a creature that was not theirs, because a child needed it. I watched an old woman learn Drakvori hatchling medicine from a text file and get it right on the first try because she paid attention. I watched a man sit in the dirt next to his daughter at dawn and put his coat over a dragon because his daughter needed him there. And I watched a child give the most important thing she owned to a frightened creature she had never seen before, in the dark, with no reason and no reward. And I watched that one small thing move through every level of this empire until it ended in the great court with the full assembly of the fourth talon lowering their heads. I came here thinking this was a retrieval mission. I am not sure what it was. I know what I am taking home from it, which is this: the smallest thing, given from the right place, does not stay small. Bryn's Landing has 3,000 people. They have grain fields and a medical office and a school with 30 students and a communications building with a desk that is slightly too small for me. They are not a significant civilization by any measure I was trained to use. I would like to formally recommend that we build better measures. He submitted the report. He sat for a while longer. Then he opened a message to his bonded partner, which he had been sending every few days for the past several months. He wrote, I am coming home soon. I will tell you everything when I get there. It will take a while. On Bryn's Landing, 3,000 people went about their ordinary lives in the cold. The east field where everything had started was planted with winter grain. The barn where Vor had grown from the size of a dog to the size of a freight vehicle stood empty and somewhat enormous. In a room in the Imperial Palace on Draxol, Vor slept with the rabbit tucked under his claw and Dara asleep against his side. The rabbit's button eyes looked at the ceiling. One eye was slightly higher than the other. Across the galaxy, on alien worlds and listening posts and small ships between stars, the broadcast of the Great Court played and replayed. Analysts wrote about it. Diplomats argued about what it meant for galactic relations. Scholars added it to their records. What spread furthest was not the analysis. It was an image, a small human girl in a dark formal robe, bowing to an empire, crooked braid and all. The caption that attached to it, in translation across 47 languages, had been written by a young journalist on a relay station who had watched the broadcast alone in a small room and then sat for 10 minutes before writing anything. It said, they called us softwalkers. They were not wrong. We just never told them what soft things can hold. Vor slept. The rabbit stayed tucked in its place. The stars turned outside the window, the same stars that looked, from far enough away, like lights someone had left on. And on a small cold farming planet at the edge of recognized space, in the east field where a little girl had once sat in the mud with a lantern and decided not to run, the winter grain grew quiet and steady in the dark.